In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the user interface controls that can be found on the Abbey Road Orchestra plugin, and in particular the string section. Starting in the top left-hand corner, we have the LED light, which is an indication as to whether your samples are still preloading into the memory of your machine. Wait for this to be solid green before you hit play in your DAW or you try and trigger any samples. To the right of this is the CPU meter, which is an indication of how hard the processor on your machine is working. We then have the disk meter, which is an indication of how hard the drive you're streaming the samples from is working. The memory meter is an indication of how much sample content is preloaded into the memory of your machine. We then have the voices meter, which shows how many audio threads are streamed at any particular one point in time. The refresh arrow is particularly useful if you have anything such as sticking MIDI notes, and this can be right-clicked for further options. The Pro Core toggle will only be available to us if we have both Core versions of the libraries installed and also Pro versions. The MIDI channel option will allow us to set the plugin to respond to 1 through to 16 MIDI channels or all MIDI channels. There's then a global tuning control, a global panning control, and also a master volume. In the very top right hand corner, we have the preset settings, which is where we can see a host of different settings which are unique to the particular preset that you have selected. The dynamics option enables us to change the behavior of the dynamics fader in the middle of the interface. There are 4 different options you can choose from here. Full velocity range enables you to have the softest dynamics all the way at the bottom and the loudest dynamics all the way at the top for long techniques such as flotando. If you have the velocity mapped to dynamics, this means that all your short techniques, such as staccato, will now respond to this dynamics fader instead of how hard or soft you hit the keys. The compressed velocity highs and lows act as a MIDI limiter, so by changing the position of this middle fader, you will limit the dynamic response of the library to be a particular dynamic layer. Below the dynamics, you have the velocity options, which is where we can change the response of the plugin to match your MIDI controller. So if you have a MIDI controller where it's really easy to perform loudly, you might want to set this to be exponential negative, and vice versa, you might wish this to be exponential positive. There's also a linear velocity, which is the default, and also a shelf velocity. The CC mappings enables you to reset all the default CC mappings that are already on the plugin or clear them all entirely. The sync to tempo function, when it's enabled, will enable you to sync the particular technique that is selected to the host tempo or BPM of your DAW. The voice choking, roll end, and soft takeover are all part of the percussion libraries and are not available for the string sections. The short releases enable you to change the position of the release trigger at the end. The solo latch option enables us to change whether the signal mixer can be set to have the solos sticking and grouped, or whether they are X or cancels the previous solo. The purge unused option will allow you to reset the memory back to just whichever technique is selected and unload all other techniques. This is only available when eco load is enabled. The global settings in the top right hand corner are covered in much more detail in the user manual. Below the global settings, we have a toggle for collapsing and expanding the interface. To the left, we've got the preset menu, so if we click the drop down to the left, we can see a whole host of different things. So starting on the left-hand side, we have the filters. So at the moment, I've got the strings filter enabled, and I can only see the strings sections. But if I choose metal percussion, I can only now see metal percussion. If I choose to star a particular preset, that will then show up in the starred filter. I can hit the play button to preview a sound, or I can hover over the information button to learn more about that particular preset. The preset is loaded by either clicking and pressing the load button or double clicking. You can also choose to show whether just the core patches are available by pressing core, and vice versa. You can do this with just pro. The 2 arrows to the right of the preset name will allow you to cycle up and down the preset menu, but that will happen within the filter system that you have enabled. The floppy disk icon will enable you to save a user preset, which will then show up in the users filter. Moving down the interface once more, we have the three main controls. The one on the left is expression, and this is a volume control which operates within the master volume of the library. We've already covered the dynamics fader, but this enables you to go from a quiet, soft dynamic all the way up to a loud, aggressive dynamic. The knob on the right-hand side by default is reverb, but this can be clicked to see a range of different options. We can change the amount of vibrato. We can change the tightness, so this will change whether we cut into the start of the notes, which is useful for quantizing short techniques. We have the release option, which enables us to make the performances really snappy when we let go of the keys, or when it's increased, when we let go of the keys, we'll hear the notes extend much further and blur together a little bit. The legato offset enables us to change how much of the legato transition is heard. The bigger the value, the more of a slow legato you're going to get, and when this is faster, you'll hear a much more snappier performance in your legato. Now, each of these controls have a varying level of control built into them, and that control changes depending on which particular technique you have available. So I fully recommend reading the user manual to learn more about each of these controls and how they correspond to each technique. In particular, the release control and in particular the legato offset control. There's a lot more information in the user manual. Now, going to the bottom of the interface, we can see all the techniques available to us, which we can click and change which technique is loaded. To the right of this, we have the technique editor, which is where we can choose to remove techniques from what's available on the preset. We can also preview that technique, hover over the information icon, like the way we can in the preset menu. We can then choose to save this custom preset arrangement. In the top right-hand corner, we have the keyboard shimmier, which is where we can change the default range of the global key switches. And we have a padlock, which is where we can lock all things technique related in place so nothing changes. Below this, we have the trigger method, which is where we choose how that selected technique is activated. So for example, we can set that technique to respond to CC range, the velocity range, so we can change the technique how hard or soft we hit the keys. We can change the technique depending on the MIDI channel we have selected, the speed in which we play, or also a program change. One thing that's worth noting is when you do decide to change the trigger method, you have to do it on all the techniques that you want. So if I want to only have MIDI channel number 3 respond to the long extended, I would have to change that. And if I then wanted the flautando to respond to MIDI channel 2, I would have to change this individually too. The activate button will enable you to change between a normal state of key switching or a latched state of key switching. When you have this set to latched, the key switch will temporarily change to the next technique before swapping back to the technique that you had selected before, and it will do that automatically. The round robins will enable you to see how many round robins that particular technique has got, and we can choose to limit that if you prefer more of a machine-gunned sound. You can reset the round robin cycle every time you hit play in your DAW by having reset on transport enabled, or you can set the round robins to change based on a key switch. So I can set a range of key switches on the keyboard in order to trigger specific round robins. The round robin options enable us to stack multiple round robins on top of each other in order to get a much thicker sound using one of the layering options. Or we have the neighbored zone option, which enables us to borrow from other notes, transpose those down, and we will get more than just the default round robin count. We have the transpose option, which enables us to change the range of the keyboard. The two-handed layout on the right-left mappings are only available in the percussion patches. Using the view select in the middle of the interface, we can change to see the signal mixer. Now, in the top left-hand corner of the signal mixer, we can choose to save a particular mixer configuration, or we can choose to load a particular configuration that we might have had saved previously. We can then refresh the signal mixer and it will snap back to its default state. The advanced control, when disabled, will show us a simple view of the mixer, and we can change this to be a close or a far away sound. Once I've changed this and I've moved back to the signal mixer, we can see that that has actually changed which signal is affected. The global option, when it's disabled, like it currently is, will enable you to set different signals depending on the technique you have selected. So for example, I've got the Spicatissimo selected now, and I have the close mic enabled. But let's say, for example, I have the long flirtando selected. Maybe I want more of an ambient sound to be associated with that particular technique. So now when I switch back between these two, I can see different signals are available depending on which one I have selected. Below each signal fader, we have the name of that particular signal. We have the ability to change which stereo output it goes out of. Whether this is visible or not will depend on the DAW you have and whether you've configured it accordingly to show multiple outputs. We then have a toggle to turn on and off that signal, and we have a solo and a mute button to audition particular signals. There's a range of shortcuts that surround the solo and mute functionality, such as Shift, I can hold down, and Solo multiple in place. There's also the solo latch button that enables us to have that set up by default. When this is deselected, it will cancel the previous solos, so you can audition more effectively. We have the two toggles at the bottom, which enable us to see more microphones. And there's also the close spot signal options, which enable us to collapse the close signals down to mono or have them stereo expanded. There's also a left-right pan for the close signals, and we can invert the left-right position of those channels too. The lock in the top right corner will lock all these settings in place. And if we use the view select in the middle of the interface once more, we can see the FX page, which is where we can see every single control that is assigned to the knob at the top. What's worth noting, again, with these is the user manual goes over every control in a lot more detail and how these controls affect all the different techniques.
Thanks for watching Spitfire Clips. Let us know if it was too long, too short, too fast, or too slow in the comments down below. Hit like if we answered your question, and subscribe for more clips, tips, tricks, and exclusive Spitfire content.